The podcast you're about to listen to may contain random lines from musical theater, terrible attempts at regional accents, and a sincere discussion about mental health. You have been warned. Are you ready to start singing with your feet? Formidable! Allez, c'est parti! Non, nous ne sommes pas fous, nous ne sommes pas ivres, nous sommes juste dans la joie. Une joie profonde, nos cœurs elle inonde. Cette joie, elle vient du ciel. Non, nous ne sommes pas fous.
Welcome to Sing With Your Feet. My name is Lily Fields, and I'm going to be your fairy godmother for the next half hour or so. I want to start today by talking about one of my children. This is my 6, almost 7-year-old. He's a lot. To call him a whirling dervish does him a disservice because he's so much more than that. He's got a lot of energy, yes, but he's also extremely kind, over-the-top forgiving. I've heard people say that he's hyperactive, which might be true, but people also used to say that about one of my cousins who grew up to be an architect and an all-around stand-up guy. So it almost makes me smile when people say that as an epithet. I have, unfortunately, on more than one occasion, said to this child, "Joshua, you are too much." I have walked down the street with this child and wondered how he does it to narrowly miss disaster with every step. Is it that he's not paying attention? Is he testing limits? Is he really that awkward? The name Joshua, Josh, Joshua, Joshua, Josh. I'm constantly saying it, trying to get his attention so that he doesn't get squashed by cyclists or electric scooter drivers or old men with walkers. The other day, I had this thought. I was thinking about Joshua, like Joshua in the Bible, the one who took up Moses' mantle and led the people into the promised land. To fill those shoes, Joshua had to have been courageous and pretty self-assured. He had to be someone who had tested enough limits in his life to be able to know what he was capable of. And I got to thinking about Joshua's mother, and how many times did she follow her kid around going, "Joshua, Josh, Joshua." You don't become someone extraordinary by sitting around. I had that thought. It was like a tiny little voice in my heart that said it. And I decided then and there that I was going to let my Joshua test out all the limits he could without my interference. I was going to stop calling out his name, which never works anyway, and let him start taking responsibility for his actions. Because am I, by trying to reduce his ability to test his limits with the intention of keeping him safe, actually causing him to test more limits because he can't know where to stop if he doesn't experience it for himself? I decided to start saying, "Okay, Josh, I trust you," when he looks to me for approval when he's about to do something I definitely don't trust him to do. And so far, he has turned back twice from his folly. It's extraordinary to think about how by our own fears and doubts, we can limit the ability of others to become who they are destined to be. If this is true of how we parent, how much more is it true of our ability to seize our own destinies? Have you ever surprised yourself by something you were able to accomplish? One of those weird superhuman moments, and you wondered where it came from? Well, we have to believe that the capacity for action was within us. It was simply that we needed the circumstances to require something extraordinary from us. By never putting ourselves in situations where we need to be extraordinary, we never learn how to be extraordinary. Our doubts about who we are, about our own skills and competencies, we learned our doubts somewhere, and it wasn't always someone telling us that we weren't capable or competent. It could also simply be out of protectiveness or being careful, or out of pride because we want to do everything perfectly the first time. What I believe for you and for me is that there is so much more that we are capable of than what we have allowed ourselves to experience. And today, I want us to talk about how we can start believing that is true. So part 1, who is my neighbor? Today, I'm going to talk about something I've been teasing since the beginning of the season, a notion that has been rumbling around in my heart for months, pretty much since the start of the year, when my New Year's resolution was to try, for this year, to live according to the Golden Rule. Quick refresher on the Golden Rule. It's a biblical notion, like Old Testament biblical, but it was expounded on and illustrated later in the Bible. It's an idea that has easily been absorbed into our Western culture. In its most simple form, it says, love your neighbor as yourself, and do for others what you want done for you. Sounds easy enough, right? The problem is that it has never been easy. From ancient times, people have been debating, but who is my neighbor? As if there were someone we should be exempt from loving. Clinging to the question, who is our neighbor, has given some people license to be xenophobes, deciding that people from areas directly surrounding them, are their neighbor, but someone who speaks a different language or who has a different skin color or who eats food that smells differently than what they eat, even though that person might live in the same apartment building as they do, well, those people are definitely not their neighbors, even though they are neighbors. You see, people suck. At least, mean people suck. And see, I just proved how very much of a hypocrite I am and why I am not at all legitimate to be talking about this subject, haven't I? Because I, a person who says that all we need to do is to love everyone, has decided to denigrate mean people, even though I have had a few really mean neighbors in my life. So let's just take this tiger, put it on the table, and yell at it for a second, shall we? I am, first and foremost, a fairy godmother, and then I'm a hypocrite. I'm a hypocrite because very often I know exactly what I should do, but I don't do it. I also very often know what I shouldn't do, but I do it anyway. I am not perfect. I am not virtuous. And if I don't set myself serious, intense guardrails, I would behave in ways that would have laced up Victorian ladies clutching their nosegays and calling for their smelling salts. I'm setting all this up for you because it's important for you to know that about me before we get too deep into the weeds later when I try to be super spiritual, okay? But let's get to mean people for a second, because mean people are going to try to put a limit on who our neighbor is in the Golden Rule. And the minute we try to put a limit on who it is that we're supposed to love, then we've already lost the plot. Mean people suck. We aren't talking to or about mean people here in this episode. And if you're here, you're probably not one of the aforementioned mean people, so please stick around for a while. Just for a second, though, just to scratch my little hypocrite's itch, I want to talk about mean people. Over the last few months, I have seen over and over and over again a video clip on Twitter, or that's what I call it, and I will continue to call it rebanding be darned. It's an older, rather unhappy-looking conservative talk show host sitting in a wood-paneled office ridiculing a classroom sign he'd seen in a newspaper photo. The sign said, "The world is a better place because you are in it." He called this sign stupid and added that it is a lie because, and I quote, "What has a fifth grader ever done?" The first time I saw this clip, I was surprised. I couldn't believe that some old man would decide to call it an inspirational message at all. But then to up the ante by being so cynical and just so mean. Plus, you know what? I have actually said that same thing to my Cinderellas right here on this podcast. You make a difference. You exist for a reason. The world is a better place because you are in it. These are not just inspirational little tidbits I throw out there. I say it because I believe it's true. And I don't just believe it for you either. I believe it for me. I believe it for everyone who wakes up in the morning hoping that at some point today they might bring more love into the world, or more patience, or more compassion, or more joy. The world is a better place because we bring our arsenal of time, talent, and treasure to bear on a world that isn't always safe or kind or patient or loving. We invest what we have because there is a deep, unexplainable need in the bottom of our souls for something beautiful to come out of our lives. Not everyone is like us, Cinderella. Somehow that need for beauty and joy was not lashed out of us by the storms of life. Even though today we may be far, far, far from actually living out our ideal life, there are still the silvery threads, and enough of them that we can still feel joy, and we can still, at times, want to share that joy with others. That grumpy old man who ridiculed the notion that the world is better because you are in it, he sucks. He is exactly the kind of old coot that does make the world darker, drearier, and a more unhappy place. He is mean and unkind, and I pity him. So there. So part 2, spiritual blah blah. Keep in mind what you know about me. I know that I'm a hypocrite, and I am trying to get better about it, so please don't hold that fact against me. I'm someone with a profound and extremely intimate attachment to God, like the God of the Bible, the one who reportedly created the universe in 6 days and all that. I don't understand, nor can I explain a lot of what it says in the Bible. I cannot tell you why bad things happen to good people. There is so much that I don't understand. But for whatever reason, my heart finds meaning and hope in what I have come to see as a relationship with, well, with God. Do not let this put you off, please. What I'm going to say later, at least I think, is still a valid argument, whether you think I'm crazy or not. But I want you to know where my line of thinking starts. So years ago, like maybe even 20 years ago now, my husband and I lived in a really sweet little apartment in Cleveland, Ohio. Hardwood floors, fun little nooks, the whole 9 yards. One of the fun little nooks was an oddly shaped closet off the living room of our apartment. We didn't own enough stuff to fill that closet, so one day I put some pillows and a blanket in that closet, and I decided that I would get up early the next morning. See, I was already practicing mise en place before I even knew that mise en place was a thing. And I would go sit in my little closet in the morning, and I would pray. The idea for this was inspired by something that's in the Bible, where it says in the translation that I was using at the time, something like, when you pray, don't pray in front of everybody like the hypocrites do. Hypocrite, hello. But go into your closet, lock the door, and then your Father in heaven will hear you. Listen, I know it's weird, but I tend to take things pretty literally. And that was something very literal that I could do that made me feel like I was trying. The thing is that, oddly enough, in that little wonky shaped closet, my cute little apartment, I started to experience things that were unusual. I don't want to over spiritualize anything, but sometimes when I would be there in my closet, these little snippets of sentences would come to me, and I would note them down and realize that they were parts of Bible verses. And I would look up those verses, and I could easily spend an hour looking things up. It was like I was on an adventure. Then one day, my adventure took me to a verse in Psalm 147, where it says, "He knows the numbers of the stars, and he calls them all by name." I loved that idea. All the billions and billions of stars, and this God who made them all, he knew all their names. Kind of blew me away. So I got to wondering if, among all the people who existed on this planet, if there had ever been anyone with my name before. I had this absolute certainty that the name that I go by, that this was not the name that God called me by. Like, I was there in my closet, and I was certain that I had a name that only God knew. Am I freaking you out? Is this getting weird? It's going to get better, I promise. So I sat there in my closet, and I asked a question. My first question, since I had started this routine of getting up early to spend time in my closet, and I asked, "What is my name?" And I promise you that before the question was out of my mouth, I knew the answer, and I could see the answer, and it shook me to the core. Like, yes, that is my name. That is the name that God would call me if we were sitting together having coffee. And it went on like this for months, and then one day there was a question for me. Not a question that anyone had ever asked me before, not one that I had been pondering or had been weighing on me at all. By then, I had decided that these random little nuggets of thoughts, and again, don't think I'm nuts, but that this was the fruit of intimacy with God. Like these little bits and pieces of Bible verses, this question came to me in much the same way. That same voice, because I don't know what else to call it, as those little Bible verses. So the question was, what would it take for you to know how much I love you? Now listen, if you already think I'm crazy, this part of the story isn't going to help. But two completely random things came out of my mouth as a response to that question. Number one, that my husband's law school debt would be completely paid off by the time he graduated. And two, that I would be somewhere in Africa, surrounded by children who needed to be loved. The debt thing was something that had been preoccupying us a lot at the time. But the Africa thing? Listen, you know me. I'm an inside girl. That was not something I had ever thought of before. And now comes the incredible part, because I am going to tell you that by some miracle, I received a bonus at my job which allowed us to pay off my husband's law school debt before he graduated. And in 3 months' time after that, I was in Uganda serving orphans in an orphanage. There's a point at which, when this kind of thing happens, you either write it off as an incredible series of coincidences, or you choose to believe that whoever this God is that has been meeting you secretly in a closet for several months actually loves you. I chose to believe that God actually loved me, and that maybe he had some pretty good plans for my life that I couldn't have begun to imagine. So I purposed, from then on, that my life would become an adventure of pursuing that love wherever it would take me. Sometimes I fail, sometimes I succeed, but when it is good, it is really, really, really good. So it is from that perspective that I want to share with you what I believe to be the most fundamental truth about the Golden Rule, which has made it something that people can quibble with. The truth is that unless we love ourselves, like really, really love ourselves, like know that we are loved and lovable and wanted and desired and have a purpose that far exceeds anything that we can understand, it is going to be very, very difficult to really love others. Digging in, grappling with our own identity and our own worthiness, clinging to the reality that we exist for a reason, even if we don't know what that reason is, and we might not ever know what that reason is, this is the work of falling in love with ourselves. You see, if the God of the universe, who made each one of the stars in the sky and has a special specific name that he uses for each of them, the same God who has a special name for each of us and who can count every single hair on my head and on your head, if he could love me so much as to provide to the most minute detail what it would take for me to know that he loves me, I mean, that's a lot of precision detail going on there. That's a lot of effort to go to for someone who just sits around in a closet for an hour each day. I felt like I had no choice but to honor and respect and, well, to love myself. This falling in love with myself thing is not something that came overnight. Maybe the articulation of it does, but the realization of it comes in fits and starts. The depths, the breadth, the heights, it's all there, just waiting to be discovered on this love adventure. Agreeing with God that he loves me and that he is right to love me, that is the holiest thing I have ever done. And it might be the thing that has brought me the most joy.
Elle me fait bondir et vibrer, crier. Elle me donne envie de chanter, danser. Elle pousse à agir, donner, partager. Et tout simplement de sourire, aimer.
So part 3, the Golden Rule and ourselves. Let's go back to those meanies and those grumpies who like to argue about the Golden Rule by questioning who the neighbor is in the equation. I'm not as much concerned about who the neighbor is in this. I'm going to assume that everyone is my neighbor based on the story of the Good Samaritan, which puts the Golden Rule to test with those hoity-toity meanies and the grumpies being illustrated in the story as the bad guys, and the good guy in the story being one of the rejected neighbors, a detested foreigner who ends up saving a guy's life. No, the part I am much more concerned about in the Golden Rule is the as yourself, as in the love your neighbor as yourself. This is the part we keep coming back to again and again because I don't think we understand what that really means. To love our neighbor as ourself presumes something very important. It presumes that we love ourselves. To love ourselves doesn't mean that we have a hyperbolic, bloated, overblown opinion of our capacities, our intelligence, our looks, our possessions. That wouldn't be love. That would be self-obsession. To love ourselves is to have a solid understanding and appreciation for who we are, what we bring to the table, what our legitimate weaknesses are, what motivates us, and what drains us of our energy. To love ourselves is to make decisions that put to use the resources that make us unique. Those silver threads we talked about in the first season. Those silver threads, whether they be our resources, our time, our talent, our treasure, whatever those are, to the benefit of our neighbors and to the benefit of the world as a whole. To love ourselves is to know what we need, and when what we need is within our reach, to seek out the provision of that need. To love ourselves is to know what we want and to be able to weigh those wants against the costs of fulfilling them. To love ourselves is to know when the cost of what we think we want is too high and to be willing to relinquish that desire if the equation will not come out in our favor. We practice doing these things for others when we do them for ourselves. The command says, do for others as you do for yourself. We cannot adequately do for others if we do not know how to do for ourselves. Doing isn't just an action, and loving our neighbor as ourselves isn't just a feeling. These are simply echoes of the behaviors we already need to be doing for ourselves. If we are skilled at knowing what we really want or really need, we can better determine what someone else wants or needs. And we get to know what we really want and we really need by spending the time to get to know ourselves, questioning ourselves, pushing on those sensitive, uncomfortable feelings to work out where the tension is so that we serve others and love others from a healthy place. Part 4, the greatest commandment. So yes, I'm going to get back into my spiritual blah blah for a second. There is a place in the Bible where someone asked Jesus, of all the commandments and all the laws, which one is the most important? And Jesus doesn't answer with one, he answers with 2. The first one, he says, is that we need to love God with all our heart, our soul, our mind, and strength. And the other, he says, is to love our neighbor as ourselves. All the rest of the laws and the prophets depend on those 2 things, he says. I don't know if there's anything practically applicable about saying that you have to love God with all your heart and soul. I wish I had some easy steps to make that happen. And as we've already established, that in order to love our neighbors, we have to love ourselves first. So, as I see it, the one practical, applicable thing that I can do today is start loving myself better. When we live without grasping how extraordinary and unique we are, that the God of the universe has a special name for us, and he knows how many hairs are on our head, it's really hard to truly love ourselves. And as I said earlier, my Cinderellas are a good bunch of people. We are kind, loving people. We are people who generally treat others with kindness. We are compassionate people with a boatload of patience and a good dose of generosity. But I want to ask you a question. Do you treat yourself with the same kindness as you treat others? Do you speak to yourself with the same patience you speak to your small children on a good day? Do you limit yourself? Do you limit yourself the same way that I put limits on my youngest by not allowing him to test his limits and what he's capable of? I really want you to think about those things. I want you to consider how you can pursue that most holiest thing that you can do. Figure out how to love yourself better. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I am going to be taking a break next week in order to make some headway on a personal project, but I will be back in your feed again soon. In the meantime, go back and listen to the series about the ideal life categories, because I'm convinced that by learning to interrogate our hopes and desires and regularly checking in on how things are going, we will make baby steps towards loving ourselves better, more lucidly, and more carefully. I want to give a great big thank you to 7 Productions here in Mulhouse, France, for the use of the song La Joie as the intro and outro to the show, to Claude Ekwe, who wrote it, and to Matt Kugler, who sang it. This is your fairy godmother signing off. Just remember, it is never too late to to start singing with your feet.